Hello, everybody. DM Geezer Jim here for yet another session, another episode of our RTFM, the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. We are going through word by word, page by page, and reading it, trying to provide a little bit of a kind of an audiobook format, as it were, with a little bit of commentary saved at the end. If you're jumping in a little bit late, feel free to check the first two episodes out. We're starting at the very beginning, going all the way through. This is our episode 3. This will be working with the sections in chapter 1. The basics. Every DM is unique and ensuring fun for all. This might go a little bit longer because these sections are a little bit lengthy, but we're going to go through them. As usual, try to remember that this book was written for the brand new Dungeon Master, the guy that the player that's out there going, shoot, we want to play D&D, but no one will be the DM. I guess I got to. I've never done it before. I'm scared to, so I decided I don't want to after all. Relax, read the 2024's DM's Guide, RTFM, beginning to end. You're going to be very well prepared and very confident as you step into the world of dungeon mastering. This book, while it doesn't have anything unique in it, there's nothing in here that's strangely different than any other DM's Guide. They did a great job of presenting it in simplified terms. Experienced DMs, you may not like the prose, you may not like the writing style, but there is some information in this book for you. I promise you that. But enough about that. Let's get into our readings. We're going to go through every DM is unique, and then we're going to go through the ensuring fun for all section. And at the end of it, I'll give you guys a little bit of commentary. But thanks for joining, and let's enough blah blah blah, and let's get into this stuff, right? Every DM is unique. The preceding example of play, that was our last episode, shows how one dungeon master might run an encounter, but no two DMs run the game in exactly the same way, and that's how it should be. You'll be most successful as a DM if you choose a playstyle that works best for you and your players. The rule of fun. D&D is a game and everyone should have fun playing it. Everyone shares equal responsibility in moving the game along, and everyone contributes to the fun when they treat each other with respect and consideration. Talking through disagreements among players or their characters and remembering that arguments or mean-spirited squabbles can get in the way of fun. People have many different ideas about what makes D&D fun. The right way to play D&D is the way you and your players agree to and enjoy. If everyone comes to the table prepared to contribute to the game, the entire table is likely to have a wonderful and memorable time. That should have been the first damn thing they wrote in the book, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm opining already here. Play style. Here are some questions that can help you define your unique style as a DM and the kind of game you want to run. Hack and slash or immersive role-playing? Does the game focus on combat and action or on a rich story with detailed NPCs? All ages or mature themes? Is this game for all ages or does it involve mature themes? Gritty or cinematic? Do you prefer gritty realism or are you more focused on making the game feel cinematic and super heroic? Serious or silly? Do you want to maintain a serious tone, or is humor your goal? Pre-planned or improvised? Do you like to plan thoroughly, or do you prefer to improvise? General or thematic? Is the game a mixture of themes and genres, or does it center on a particular theme or a genre such as horror? Morally ambiguous or heroic? Are you comfortable with moral ambiguity, such as allowing the characters to explore whether the ends justify the means? Or are you happier with straightforward heroic principles such as justice, sacrifice, and helping the downtrodden? House rules. House rules are new or modified rules you add to your game to make it your own and to enhance the style you have in mind for your game. Before you establish a house rule, ask yourself 2 questions. Will the rule or change improve the game? And will my players like it? If you're confident that the answer to both questions is yes, give the new rule a try. Present house rules as experiments and ask your players to provide feedback for them. If you introduce a house rule that isn't fun, remove or revise the rule. Recording rules interpretations. If a question about the interpretation of a rule comes up in your game, record how you decided to interpret it. Add that to your collection of house rules so you and your players can reference it when the rule comes up again later. Precedence. Atmosphere. Some DMs use music to create an appropriate atmosphere for their game sessions. They might use soundtracks from adventure movies or video games, although classical, ambient, or other music styles can also work well. Some DMs adjust lighting or use sound effects. Miniatures and dioramas can contribute to the game's atmosphere and help players visualize events. Check with your players, though. Some might find music, lighting, or sound effects distracting. They might prefer not to be startled by loud noises, or they might need to avoid certain lighting effects. Delegation. If there are parts of the game you prefer not to handle yourself, assign them to the players who enjoy them. If you don't want to break your narrative stride by looking up a rule, designate another player to be the rulebook reference expert. If you don't like tracking initiative, ask another player to do so. Learn by observing. One of the best ways to learn how to run a D&D game is to observe other DMs in action. Another DM can give you a solid foundation for understanding the role, as well as inspire you with cool things you can do in your games. You can use these questions to help reflect on a game you observe. Beginning the session. How did the DM start the session? Was there a recap? Body language. What gestures did the DM use when describing a scene? How did the DM's body language change when playing different NPCs? DM voice. Did the DM use different voices or mannerisms for NPCs? Did the DM change pitch or tempo of narration in different situations? Player participation. Did the players participate in the world building or make decisions that seemed to send the adventure in an unexpected direction? How did the DM handle it? Rules educations. To what extent did the DM lean on the rules to educate outcomes? Did the DM adjudicate situations wisely or in ways that made the game fun to watch? The 3 pillars. How much of the session was taken up by combat, exploration, or social interaction? Tone and mood. How would you describe the tone and mood of the game? Did it change over the course of the session? Turns of phrase. Were there any words or bits of narration that you really liked? If so, jot them down. World building. What elements of the DM's world of the adventure grabbed your attention? The next section is ensuring fun for all. This is a little bit meaty, forewarning in advance. Ahead of the game, if you haven't done so already, discuss with your players the experience that you're all hoping for, as well as topics, themes, and behavior that might spoil someone's enjoyment of the game. Session 0. Mutual respect. Whether you're playing with longtime friends or strangers, it's important to create a foundation of mutual trust. The best games happen when everyone at the table feels safe enough to be themselves, speak up, and get into character. It's up to everyone to uphold the principles of respect. Difficult conversations often fall on the DM to lead, but they don't have to. If one player's behavior is interfering with everyone else's enjoyment, everyone has a stake in helping to resolve this issue. Setting expectations. Before you assemble a group around a game table, pitch the adventures you're thinking about running to your prospective players. Note the in-world conflicts that might arise, the setting's overall tone, and the themes you'd like to explore. The Every DM is Unique section earlier in this chapter can help you describe your game to others. Telling players what to expect prepares them as they imagine what sort of characters they could create and launches conversations about the content to be embraced and avoided. You don't need to reveal the major plot points or twists in your story, but share the themes you're interested in exploring, the kinds of stories you're inspired by, and which flavors of fantasy outlined in Chapter 5 that interest you. Being transparent with your players allows them to decide if this is a game they want to play, which is best to know before play begins. Being clear about your expectations and making sure you understand players' expectations in return can help ensure a smooth game. Take your players' opinions, desires seriously, and make sure they take yours just as seriously. Ideally, you'll find a style of play that suits everyone. And here's a little bit of a sheet. Game expectations. DM name, player name, game themes and flavor, potentially sensitive elements, triggering things. What do we not want to play around with? Spiders, snakes, demons, romance, mind control. I don't like you taking over my character and not letting me have agency over my character. That's a mind control thing. That's a sensitive element. Hard limits. Don't mention or include. Soft limits. Handle with care or off camera. The fade to black for the horny bard. Players' hopes and expectations. At the table concerns. So, your convent, your contract, your whatever you want to call it, campaign compact might look different than this, but you should have something written down for your expectations that everyone agrees on that you can refer to. So, using the game expectations sheet, the game expectations tracking sheet is a tool that you can use to set expectations at the start of a game and ensure the game is fun for everyone. Before distributing these sheets to players, fill in the 2 topmost boxes. Game theme and flavor. In this box, describe the direction you envision for your game. See the settings expectations sections for the kind of information to include here. Potentially sensitive elements. If you know that some of the elements in the game might run against some players' limits, list those elements in this box. See the hard and soft limits section for examples. Once the above information is added, give a copy of the sheet to each player. Players can fill out their sheets anonymously, but ask each of them to add the following information. Limits. Use an X for a hard limit or question mark for a soft limit, indicating any potential sensitive elements that are problematic. Add any other elements that they want to avoid. Hopes, expectations, and concerns. In the last two boxes, share any hopes and expectations for the game and list any concerns about behavior at the table. Collect all the sheets, gather your players' limits into a separate anonymous document that the whole group can then access. We'll get to comments here in a bit. Hard and soft limits. Beyond the general themes and flavors of fantasy you're interested in exploring in your campaign, it's important to have a conversation with your players about topics that can be sensitive or uncomfortable. It can be helpful to discuss these topics in terms of hard and soft limits. A soft limit applies to a topic that should be handled carefully, as it might create unwelcome anxiety, fear, or discomfort. A hard limit applies to a topic that should not be mentioned or described. DMs and players can have phobias or triggers that others might not be aware of. Any in-game topic or theme that makes a member of the gaming group feel unsafe, a hard limit, must be avoided. If a topic or theme makes one or more players nervous but they consent to include it in-game, a soft limit, incorporate it with care, if at all, and be ready to quickly veer away from it if needed. Common in-game limits apply to topics such as intra-party romance, sex, exploitation, racism, enslavement, and violence towards children and animals. Limits can also apply to certain creatures such as spiders, snakes, rats, and demons. It's also important to discuss limits around what harm might befall characters, including mind control magic, helplessness, and death. That said, D&D is a game that has in-world conflicts and mayhem. Certain core elements of the game are difficult to ignore. For example, taking damage isn't a limit you can work around easily. Similarly, character death is something that happens from time to time, though the game has ways to counteract it or avoid it. See Death in Chapter 3 for some suggestions. Communicating limits. Make sure that everyone is comfortable with how the discussion of limits takes place. Players might not want to discuss limits aloud, especially if they're new to role-playing games or haven't spent a lot of time with other members of the group. One way to alleviate such discomfort is to provide a way for players to share limits anonymously. Everyone can jot down their limits on an anonymous survey, such as the game expectation tracking sheet that was in this chapter. Compile limits into a list that can be shared with the group. Limits are not negotiable, and everyone in the group needs to respect them. The start of a campaign is a great time to have this discussion, but further discussion is warranted each time a new player joins the group or when the campaign has a shift in story or tone. Someone might cross a line and need to be reminded of a limit, or someone might not think to include some of their limits in the initial discussion. Players can also discover new limits as the campaign unfolds. Check in with the group every few sessions to make sure everyone's comfortable with how the game is developing, updating the group's limits as needed. Shifting limits. Encourage players to bring any additional limits to you privately or in the moment so you can add them to the list. Trust that the players know their needs best and update the game accordingly. Limits in play. Since D&D is improvisational, the game can go in unexpected directions. It's helpful to have an agreed-on signal that players can use to communicate that the limit has been violated, allowing you to adjust quickly. That signal might be a gesture, such as crossing the arms in an X, or raising a palm in a stop, or flipping you the bird. I'm kidding. A code word or phrase touching or lifting a designated object, or anything else that your group agrees upon. Players should also feel safe to say stop and pause the game until an issue is resolved. The person who invokes the signal can comment on what they want adjusted, but doesn't have to explain why the content is objectionable. The signal shouldn't trigger a debate or discussion. Thank the player for being honest about their needs, set the scene right, and move on. Make it clear to players that if a person isn't comfortable using the signal, they can step away from the game or call for a break to talk to you privately. Players may also give a friend permission to use the signal on their behalf. As the DM, lead by example. Take your players' needs seriously and use every tool at your disposal to adjust how your shared story plays out. Intra-party conflict. When there's conflict between players in an adventuring party, it's usually a sign that one of three things is going on. A disruptive player. A player is exhibiting antisocial behavior in the game. How to deal with it is covered in the antisocial behavior section. Coming soon. Player conflict. Conflicts between players sometimes surface. Conflicts between players sometimes surface. Bad rating there, I'm sorry. These conflicts are best handled away from the gaming table. Encourage the players to resolve their conflict outside of the game. If that conflict keeps arising at the game table, you might need to ask them to step away from the campaign for a while or leave the game entirely. Them. Role-playing. Conflicts between characters aren't always bad. It's okay for characters and players to disagree about how to deal with a captured enemy or which side to back in a brewing war. If the disagreement gets too heated, take a break and perhaps discuss out of character how the players would like to proceed. If you can't tell which of these dynamics is in play, have a conversation with the characters about it, the players about it. Big meaty sections here, man. Good stuff. Session 0 information. A lot of DMs struggle with this stuff after they've been running a game for a while. Hey, I've been running a game for about 2 months and I have this problem that pops up. How do I deal with it? It's so nice that they're giving this information before you even start your career, right? Sorry, a little bit of a commentary there. So next section is respect for the players. Your players need to know from the start that you'll run a game that is fun, fair, and tailored for them. That you'll allow each of them to contribute to the story and that you'll pay attention to them when they take their turns. Your players also count on you to make sure an adventure's threats don't target them personally. Never make players feel uncomfortable or threatened. Did you really do that? Sidebar. Can players retract what they just said when said that their characters did? Some DMs take a hardline position. If you said it, your character did it. Such a strict position tends to make players much more careful about what they say, which can dampen the atmosphere and discourage humor. Other DMs let their players change their minds freely. This creates a more relaxed mood at the table, which might slow the pace of the game. A common compromise is to rule that the players can retract or change anything their characters did up until the point they learn the consequences of their actions. Once you describe what happens as a result, it's too late for the players to change their mind. Are you sure you want to do that question? It's a real thing. The next thing is sharing the spotlight. As the DM, don't play favorites. Don't let one player do all the talking and make sure you check in what every character is doing, especially during periods of exploration and social interaction, rather than focusing just on one player's character. Sometimes you'll encounter players who tell other players what their characters should do, claim the best magic items for themselves, bully other players, and refuse to share the spotlight. Away from the game, point out that player's behavior is spoiling fun for the others, and ask the player to tone it down. If the player refuses to change this behavior, ask the player to leave the group. Some problems arise when a player assumes that their particular style of play is superior to others, and they lose patience when the encounter is tailored to other players' preferences. Remind the impatient player, perhaps away from the game, that they have a group to please, not just one player. Tragic limits. Some players resist getting invested in the world of the game because they don't want to endure the pain of seeing the people and places they care about threatened or destroyed. Other players gleefully detail a backstory full of beloved NPCs, fully expecting the DM to use these people as bait, tragic victims, and unexpected villains. It's important to understand your players' preference so that you neither alienate the players by callously destroying what they love, nor bore them by leaving their backstory out of the campaign story. When you have antagonists threaten the people and places that the characters love, be sure that the characters have a chance to stave off the worst outcome. During the game, the characters should have the opportunity to avoid or mitigate losses in heroic ways, with the tragedy being a consequence of the character's actions and decisions, not a foregone conclusion. Moments of helplessness in the face of devastating tragedy are better suited for characters' backstories. DM die rolling. Should you hide your die rolls behind a DM screen, or should you roll your dice in the open for all players to see? Choose either approach and be consistent. Each approach has benefits. Hidden die rolls. Hiding your die rolls keeps them mysterious and allows you to alter results if you want to. For example, you could ignore a critical hit to save a character's life. Don't alter the die rolls too often, though, and never let the players know when you fudge a die roll. Sorry. Visible die rolls. Rolling dice in the open demonstrates impartiality. You're not fudging rolls to the character's benefits or detriment. Even if you usually roll behind a screen, it can be fun to make an especially dramatic roll where everyone can see it. The next thing is overly cautious players. Overly cautious players can slow down the game by checking every flagstone, door, or wall in a dungeon for traps and hidden dangers. Sometimes this behavior is a learned response to too many unpleasant surprises in past adventures, and sometimes it's just a manifestation of players' personalities. Here are some in-game techniques you can use to encourage your players to act boldly. Avoid random perils. Avoid traps and ambushes that feel random and have little importance to the rest of the adventure. Create time pressure. Set up a situation where the characters are racing towards a goal or desperation. Use this technique with caution, as time pressures can increase players' anxiety. Telegraphing encounters. Give players advance warning that an encounter is imminent. Maybe they hear the heavy footfalls of a giant or see a dragon flying overhead before they have to confront it. This encourages your players to move towards or away from the encounters rather than anxiously anticipating an ambush. If these in-game techniques don't have their desired effect, have a conversation outside of the game with your players about which game elements are causing them to play in an overly cautious way. Come to an agreement that those elements won't appear in your game, and as keeping the game moving will result in a better experience. Respect for the DM. As the DM, you have the right to expect your players to respect you and the effort you put into making a fun game for everyone. The players need to let you direct the campaign with their input, arbitrate the rules, and settle arguments. And when you're narrating the action of the game, the players should be paying attention. Players die rolling. Players should roll their dice in full view of everyone. If a player scoops up their dice before anyone else can see what they've rolled, encourage the player to be less secretive. When a die falls on the floor, do you count it or re-roll it? When it lands cocked against a book, do you pull the book away and see what it lands, or do you re-roll the die? Work with your players to answer these questions and record these answers as a house rule. The social contract of adventures. You must provide reasonably appealing reasons for the characters to undertake the adventures you prepare. See Drawing the Players in Chapter 4 for advice on this topic. In exchange, the players should go along with these hooks. It's okay for your players to give you some pushback on why their characters should want to do what you're asking them to do, but it's not okay for them to invalidate the hard work you've done preparing an adventure by willfully going in a different direction. If you feel like you're keeping up your end of the bargain, but your players aren't, have a conversation with them away from the gaming table. Try to understand what hooks would motivate their characters and make sure the players understand the work you're putting into preparing adventures for them. Rules discussions. Work out a policy about the rules discussions at the table. Some groups don't mind putting the game on hold while they discuss a different interpretation of a rule. Others prefer to let the DM make a call and continue playing. If you gloss over a rules issue in play, make a note of it and return the issue later. Some players like to use the rules to argue against your decisions. While such players can be helpful when you're stuck or make a rules mistake that's easily corrected, players who argue the rules too often can disrupt the flow of a game. If a player wants to pause play to find a specific rule or reference, you can invite the player to search for it while you and the rest of the player continue the game. That player's character essentially steps out of the game for as long as it takes. Monsters don't attack the character, and the character takes a dodge action in combat until the player rejoins the group. This situation allows the other players to keep playing instead of letting one player stop the game. Character knowledge. Encourage your players to play their characters within the limits of what their characters know and understand. It can be helpful to maintain the distinction between player and character knowledge by simply asking, what do your characters think? Anachronistic thinking is another potential pitfall. You might need to remind the players that the characters don't know how to make the things that don't exist in the game world, such as modern firearms, antibiotics, and they don't have the player's understanding of modern science, which might not apply in the game universe anyway. Similarly, sometimes a player is familiar with a published adventure you're running or knows the monster manual backwards and forward. Encourage that player to keep that knowledge separate from the character's knowledge and allow the other players to discover it through play. Antisocial behavior. People often play D&D because it lets them, through their characters, do things they can't do in real life, fight monsters, cast spells, and so on. However, for some players, this means wreaking havoc in towns or betraying their allies. What they want in the game has nothing to do with heroic adventure, but using the game rules to act out antisocial fantasies. If this behavior comes up in your game, it might be time to reopen the conversation about the kind of game you want to play. If it's just one player causing the trouble, it's perfectly appropriate to issue an ultimatum. An out-of-control player who wants to continue playing with the group must stop being disruptive and play as part of the team. Don't let players get away with being jerks to the other players using the excuse, "That's what my character would do." It's nice to see that in the fucking DM's guide. Evil characters. Players who want to play evil characters might be looking to carry out antisocial behavior in the game. If a player asks permission to play an evil character or comes to the table with one already made, talk to that player about what they have in mind and make sure their plans square with the group's expectations for your game. Sometimes a player wants to explore playing an evil character for perfectly good and non-disruptive reasons, and sometimes a whole group decides it might be fun to play evil characters together. These are valid options as long as everyone's on the same page about how the campaign will go. Players exploiting the rules. Some players enjoy poring over the D&D rules and looking for optimal combinations. This kind of optimizing is part of the game. See the Know Your Players in Chapter 2. But it can cross the line in being exploitative, interfering with everyone else's fun. Setting clear expectations is essential when dealing with this kind of rules exploitation. Bear these principles in mind. Number 1, rules aren't physics. The rules of the game are meant to provide a fun game experience, not to describe the laws of physics in the world of D&D, let alone the real world. Don't let players argue that a bucket brigade of ordinary people can accelerate a spear to light speed by all using the ready action to pass the spear to the next person in line. The ready action facilitates heroic action. It doesn't define the physical limitations of what can happen in a 6-second combat round. The game is not an economy. The rules of the game aren't intended to model a realistic economy, and players to look for loopholes that let them generate infinite wealth using combinations of spells are exploiting the rules. Combat is for enemies. Some rules apply only during combat or while a character is acting in initiative order. Don't let players attack each other or other helpless creatures to activate those rules. Can I punch my boy while we're walking through the hallway to keep him enraged? No. Rules, unless you want to. Rules rely on good faith interpretation. The rules assume that everyone reading and interpreting the rules has the interest of the group's fun at heart and is reading the rules in that light. Outlining these principles can help hold a player's exploits at bay. If a player persistently tries to twist the rules of the game, have a conversation with that player outside of the game and ask them to stop. Sidebar: knowing the rules. You don't have to be an expert on the rules to be a good DM. Of course, it's helpful to be familiar with the rules, especially the ones in the player's handbook, but facilitating fun is more important than implementing the rules perfectly. If you're not sure how to apply the rules in a situation, you can always ask the opinion of the players as a group. It might take a few minutes, but it's usually possible to reach an answer that feels fair to everyone, and that's more important than a correct answer. You don't need to know every spell in the player's handbook or the features of every class. Set the expectation the players are responsible for telling you what their abilities and spells do. Huge, huge, huge. The next section and the final section of our reading today is going to be rules for the virtual table. Setting expectations is just as important in a digital environment as it is in person. Some groups confine out-of-character jokes, comments, and memes to a text channel, keeping the voice channel focused on the game. But some groups find it distracting to have a separate conversation unfolding in text while the game is going on. Choose an option that works best for your group. Who moves the tokens on a virtual tabletop? Are players expected to use the built-in dice roller, or is it okay to roll physical dice and report the results? The particular technology you're using might dictate answers to these questions or raise other questions you'll need as you sort out of play. Alrighty, so that's the end of our third episode, and we covered Chapter 1. Every DM is unique and ensuring fun for all. And these are some thick sections here, okay? So, come on, motherfucker. Hello? Mic check. I think you guys can hear me. I can't hear myself. That's okay. It's a headphone issue now. So anyway, the first thing that we're going to get to, sorry about that minor little technical thing there, is the first section is the every DM is unique. Not every technique's going to fit you. Not everything's going to fit for you. Not everything here may apply to how you want to run a game, and that's okay. We're trying to cast a wide net and let you find the parts that you need. But just because you do certain things a certain way and I do certain things a certain way doesn't mean everyone's wrong. There is no right, there is no wrong, there's just different. And what works for your group is what's right for you and your group. That's the main thing you need to take out of the every DM is unique section here, okay? The play styles, you're going to find your own terms for these, but the idea here is to get you thinking as a DM. When I'm running a game, what is it like? Because you need to be able to describe these things to your players so they know what they're in for. The idea of buyer beware, okay? Understand these terms, even if they're not the ones you prefer. Find some common terminology that will describe how your game style and how your play style will be, so when you describe it to the players, they get excited about it. Or if they're not excited about it, at least they know what they're getting into and you know that you need to change something, right? The next thing is house rules, and I like what they do here. They're keeping it nice and simple. Newer modified rules. Will they improve the game, and will my players like it? That's it. As long as it's consistent and sustainable and it improves the game, then knock yourself out. Make some house rules. Make some homebrews. It's okay. The atmosphere. Important to check in with your group before you start putting in music and lights and candles and all that kind of shit. They can't see their character sheets. They're not going to be into it. Delegation is important. It's okay, 100% to let someone else track initiative, etc. And I want to say the delegation part should have been also includes what we talked about, the ensuring fun. My job is not to know the character's spells. My job is to verify that they're using the spells properly within the rules. They need to be able to read their spells. They need to read their abilities. You have too much on your plate to have to try to memorize every spell and every ability for every class in the game. Can't do it and still have fun with it. Make your players be responsible for it and make them be honorable as far as reading the spells out loud and ensuring fairness. Fairness goes all the way around the table. The learning by observing. This is a good technique, but the one thing I'm going to kind of a little bit editorial content here, the Matt Mercer effect. God bless the man. God bless the work he's done. God bless everything that he's done for our hobby. But this is not the standard that you need to hold yourself to on day one. The Brendan Lee Mulligan effect. The anyone who's been doing D&D for years effect. They are going to be a role model. But that's like watching LeBron James and being pissed off because you can't slam dunk the first time after watching a game. This is guidelines for you. These are your professionals. That may be your ultimate benchmark but if you're not doing Matt Mercer voices, you're not doing it wrong. It's okay. These are just examples. So when you're watching online play to learn from it, take inspiration from it. But don't use this as your benchmark for your success. If your players showed up, they had fun, and they're coming back next week, you're doing a good job. Straight up, okay? Ensuring fun for all, the mutual respect, the setting expectations. There's a lot of stuff here that I don't want to repeat, but I do appreciate one thing here. The group, all of the stuff that we would need for a session 0 is listed in the basics. The holistic concepts of setting up a fair, balanced, communicative table it's all here, man. So make sure you're using it. I appreciate the fact that they're telling you as a dungeon master, if someone's being a problem, have them leave the table. Preserve the spirit of your game. Preserve the peace at your table. Don't keep letting the one problem child be the problem child. If they're disrupting the game, ask them to leave the game. It's okay. Promise you. I like a lot of the stuff that was in respect for the players, respect for the DMs. I know a lot of it might be what you call common sense stuff, but a little bit of personal commentary. Common sense isn't as common as it used to be. Considerate behavior, common courtesy isn't understood the same way as it used to be. Different people see different things a different way. It's important to establish what this looks like at your table. The whole thing of don't be a dick, you'd like to think that people, don't be a dick is a good enough of a statement. Don't be an asshole. But we generally have a different variety, and no, that's just being fun. That's not being an asshole. Some people feel that way. Whereas what you see them being as dickish behavior is what they see is just normal play. You've got to establish these things at the beginning. Ultimately, as you're setting up your table, you're trying, and it was mentioned a couple times in chapter 1, you're trying to set up a safe environment where everyone can act weird with each other and not feel judged or condemned for it. That's really what we're doing. We have the 6'4" trucker pretending to be a 3 tall gnome girl who shoots an arcane cannon off of their corner, while your 5'2" girl is playing a 6'8" lizard man who likes to chew on the bones of their enemies. My job as a DM is to provide a safe area for everyone to inhabit their characters and give them an environment to have fun. Okay? So don't lose track of that. But hey, that's chapter 1. 3 episodes. We're all done. Thank you guys. I know this one went a little bit farther than last ones, but please, please, please. If you're listening to the audiobook, hopefully you're enjoying it. Feel free to keep playing replays, but I really recommend that you guys also pick up the book yourselves. There's a lot of really good information here. RTFM, read the frickin' manual, read the frickin' module. The idea is not memorizing, but making the information yours, owning the information yourself, and synthesizing it in a way that works for your table rather than hoping that someone does a video that touches on it. So please, even though I'm enjoying doing the RTFMing, I encourage you guys to read as well when you have the time and when you have the resources. But hey, likes, follows, subscribes are appreciated. If you want to continue on, we'll be back. We're going to keep this series going until we get done with the DM's guide. Going to try to keep it in 20, 30-minute sections when I can. If you want to join us for live discussions, hit me up over on Twitch, DM Geezer Jim over there. If you want to help support our processes, you can feel free to throw a donation over on Patreon. You can sub up over on our Twitch channel, however else you want to support it. But thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to help you guys learn about the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. We'll be back with some more episodes soon. You guys take care.